Welcome, Robin. It's lovely to have you here. I've heard that in Timbuktu, books were considered a sign of wealth and prestige. How true is that, and what does that tell us about how Africans valued knowledge?
Our best source on this is a visitor to Timbuktu, and his name was Leo Africanus, and he is said to have got there somewhere around 1526. And he wrote, in Timbuktu, there are numerous judges, doctors, and clerics, all receiving good salaries from the king. He pays great respect to men of learning. Doctors, what we mean by doctors is PhDs, clerics, people involved in the religion. And essentially, these people being supported by the king, that's evidence of a university culture, essentially a university culture supported by the state. And if you consider that the main trade items in Timbuktu, in Mali, in West Africa, the main trade items were salt, gold, leather, and then books. What have we been told? There is a big demand for books in manuscript. More profit is made from the book trade than any other line of business, says Leo Africanus. More profit is made from books than gold. More profit is made from books than salt. More profit is made from books than leather. So books is their most profitable industry. And it became a thing in West Africa that you would show off your libraries. And there is a famous professor called Ahmed Baba, and he, in a conversation with the ruler of Morocco, having been enslaved by the ruler of Morocco, says, I had the smallest library of any of my friends, and your soldiers took from me 1,600 books. 1,600 books is the smallest library of any of his friends. Just let that sink in. 1,600 books is the smallest library of any of his friends. So it's a little bit different to the attitude that our people have towards learning today. And clearly, our attitude needs to go back to what it was when it came to books and learning and intellectual culture and so forth.
Did you say that a doctor was classed as, it could be a cleric, it could be a physician?
There's doctors, there's clerics, there's lawyers.
Okay.
So by doctor, most people hearing that would think medical doctor.
Right.
No, a doctor is a PhD in any subject, do you see?
Yeah.
Not just medicine.
So a doctor could have been a priest or astrologist. A doctor could have been anything.
Yeah, just as a range as, that you can be a PhD in economics, you can be a PhD in business, you can be across the board, PhD in mathematics.
So they actually had systems, universities, colleges, these types of things that would issue doctorates.
And not only that, did I mention Professor Henry Louis Gates visiting Timbuktu and meeting the mayor of Timbuktu, Ali Sidi? Did I mention that?
Yes.
I did indeed. Right, why did I mention that? Ali Sidi shows the turbans that a graduate would get. Does that make sense? There's a particular way of tying your turban that shows you've graduated. And then the people that become real masters become your PhDs. Do you see?
Let's talk about Islam's spread through Africa. How did it influence culture, especially traditional spiritual practices and ancestral veneration?
Islam was very, very much a conquering, colonizing force.
Right.
Now, there were some good things that came out of it, but there was a lot of destruction that came out of it as well. And we have to be honest about the destruction. So essentially, Islam came into Africa with the Arab conquest of North Africa, which took place between 639 and 708 AD. The Arabs conquered their way into what is today Egypt, what is today Libya, what is today Tunisia, what is today Algeria, and what is today Morocco. Mm-hmm. And they displaced the indigenous people who were in these countries. That's why there's a debate about, were the ancient Egyptians black? Prove it. Well, we shouldn't have to prove it. Ancient Egypt, modern Egypt, would have been a black country today had there not been an Arab conquest. Mm-hmm. And the same is true with Libya, the same is true with Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. They would be black countries today. Mm-hmm. Why they're not is the indigenous populations have been displaced and replaced by the conquerors.
Yeah.
Now, the conquerors were practicing Islam. And so Islam spread into Africa, and non-Arabs, indigenous Africans, were converted. And what then happened was Islam became successful when rulers took it on. And you had, for example, a movement of Islamic propaganda known as the Almoravids coming out of Senegal, spreading Islam. So these were Africans spreading Islam. Mm-hmm. And it is said that they converted King Baramindina of Mali, and so he becomes Muslim. And we now get Muslim dynasties in Mali. We get Muslim dynasties in Songhai. There's non-Muslim dynasties as well. But Islam becomes established as the religion of the cities. Traditional religions are still the religions of the villages. And so Sharia and versions of it becomes the law book. It's the law book in Mali, it's the law book in Songhai. And the version of it is the teachings of a Middle Eastern intellectual, the Imam Maliki law. That's what was spread in West Africa. Now, the version of Islam that became popular during this period is a spiritual form of Islam, Sufism. Okay. Now, Sufism does have an African origin. The first Sufi is a person who was born near the Egypto-Nubian border. His name was Zu-ul-Nun. Zu-ul-Nun. He's described specifically as light-skinned. The records do say that. But if you're born near the Egypto-Nubian border, you're going to be an African. Yeah?
Yeah.
So he is the first Sufi. And that is very, very popular in West Africa. And then you end up with people mixing traditional religion and Islam. So if you ask them, yeah, I'm Muslim, but who are you praying to? Well, I pray to the saints, the African saints. And so the city of Timbuktu became known as the city of 333 saints. Those would all be local Africans who died in the region. Their tombs have been preserved. And then that became a part of the religion. Mm-hmm. So there's a book called the Tariq el-Fetash. It's written by a Timbuktu professor. It's a history book. And laying out the history of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Some of that material is in this book. I've read it, and there's a whole chapter where it talks about, and if you want a certain intercession from the divine forces, you need to go to this particular tomb and pray. And they will name the tomb, or that particular tomb, and pray. Now, people listening to this will think, but that's not real Islam. I don't care. That's how we did it. And that is our synthesis of African tradition and Islam. And the significance, you may know that there's been a lot of political problems in Timbuktu in recent times. Mm-hmm. You had the Tuaregs kicking off. And they're kicking off because there's been long-standing beef between the Tuaregs and everybody else. But you also have international fighters coming from the Middle East, coming from Pakistan, and so on and so forth, seizing the Tuareg grievance and fighting on their behalf. And those people have been trying to destroy the 333 shrines in Timbuktu. Why? Because they say it's not Islam. And my thing is, people have got a right to their opinion, but you don't have a right to come into my ends and destroy my shrines.
Yeah.
You don't have that right. And, people need to make that absolutely clear.
Would you say that although most of these traditional cultures have adopted Islam, that they've still kept their traditional spiritual practices, their ancestral worship, but they've just hid it under the guise of Islam? Or would you say that some of these they've been doing that for so long that they have lost their traditions? What would you think the proportions are?
It's a complicated question to answer. And why it's complicated is because a lot of us have an idea of cultural purity, which doesn't really exist. And let me explain what I mean. If you were to say, if an African is a Muslim, that means he's not a real African anymore. He's following somebody else's tradition. Why doesn't that argument apply to Europeans practicing Christianity? Christianity started in the Middle East, the same place that Islam started. The Middle East isn't Europe. None of the founders of Christianity or Judaism were Europeans, none of them. But we don't have a problem with that. We have no problem classifying Christianity as European culture. But the moment Africans become Muslims, we have a problem with it. Why? Why do we have a problem? So we have to apply either the same standards to both, or we don't apply the same standards.
That's very true.
Now, what happens, of course, with any religion is how it's interpreted makes all the difference to the cultural dealings. Now, I've been to Mali. I was a guest of the late Professor Adamasama Sekou. And by the way, the mayor of Timbuktu, Ali Sidi, became my driver.
Okay.
Yeah, this is why I can speak about him from this great. I spent days with him, great man. And we were having these kinds of conversations throughout. Mali is a liberal place. It's not, you can't do this, you can't. It's a liberal place, It's a very, you can see when a culture is the product of civilization going back 4,000 years. They have 4,000 years of civilized history. That's longer than most places have. Yeah. And, it's just a shame that I can't speak French.
Why do you think Muslim African scholars sometimes downplayed the scale of knowledge and wealth in places like ancient Ghana and Guinea?
You're right that they definitely did that. And it's religious scholars everywhere looking negatively on their pre-Abrahamic past, Abrahamic Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. And before that, we look at it as backward. We look at it as primitive. This is not to say they actually were backward or actually were primitive. Ancient Ghana was a brilliant civilization. Brilliant civilization. If we look at the prehistory, we are looking at them building in stone from about 2000 BC. That's an old period. Building cities 800 BC, and then creating kingdoms and ultimately an empire that ruled half of West Africa, centralized into one central network of power. There is an account of a gentleman called Ibn Hawqal. He visits ancient Ghana in 951 AD, and records seeing a merchant write a second merchant a check for 42,000 golden dinars.
Wow.
A check, 951 AD. That's more than 1,000 years ago. A merchant writing another merchant a check. Now, this is the kind of heritage that we're talking about. Then we have, I mentioned the Tariq el-Fatash, the Chronicle for the Seeker of Truth, written by a Timbuktu professor, mentions one of the kings of ancient Ghana called King Kanasai, and mentions that King Kanasai had 1,000 horses and 3 attendants per horse, 3,000 attendants looking after these 1,000 horses. Okay, why is that important? One of the conversations that we in the Black Secret have been having is anytime you mention horse culture, you're automatically speaking of the elites, old money culture, aristocratic, your name goes back into history as an aristocrat. So horses, that's the significance of horses in human history. So even today, there is a big difference between new money and old money. And one of the big differences is old money still practices horse culture. And it blows people's minds. What? We were doing that in ancient Ghana. Yes, we were doing that in ancient Ghana. Moreover, during the slave trade period, where Black people were captured and enslaved by the Europeans in the Americas, in the Caribbean, and in South America, one of the things that Black people were enslaved to do was cowboy culture.
Right.
And the reason we were picked on, we were targeted, is because Europeans knew that we've already got those skills because we've been dealing with horse culture for the longest period of time. Do you see?
You often reference the 5092 manuscript when speaking about Timbuktu's brilliance. What makes this particular text so significant?
Purely because of its unintentionally humorous nature. It's actually 5292. And what the manuscript is let me give you the background. The ruler of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, visited Mali and met the ruler of Mali. And the conversation ensued where Thabo Mbeki found out, you guys have got manuscripts. Perhaps I can swing South African resources behind it to preserve the manuscripts. Do you see? And what came out of it was the South Africa Timbuktu project. And then somebody had the idea of perhaps selecting 50 Timbuktu manuscripts, which could form part of a traveling exhibition, taking these manuscripts around Africa so that Black people elsewhere can see, wait a minute, there's an ancient civilization with writing. I thought Africa had no writing. And one of the manuscripts they ended up moving around was 5292, and it's called Advising Men on Sexual Conduct with Their Women. And a lot of it is hocus pocus, hubble, bubble, toil and trouble. A lot of it's that type of stuff. Various concoctions that you're supposed to mix together and use just before sexual intercourse. And there supposedly has sexually invigorating properties. And one such concoction is said to give a woman an orgasm to the point of madness. And it says that in the manuscript.
Okay.
So that's what, it even says which parts of the Quran you're supposed to read before.
There's a persistent myth that Africans didn't record their history outside of Egypt. Why do you think this narrative exists, and how do we challenge it?
All right. It is true that writing Africa's history is not straightforward, but that's not the same as saying there's no documents. What it means is it's a complicated story to put together. But let's look at some of the documents we do have. With Ghana, Mali, Songhai, we do have the two Timbuktu chronicles, the Tariq al-Sudan, written by one Timbuktu professor, the Tariq al-Fatash, written by another Timbuktu professor. And some of these accounts are very, very detailed, and you can definitely write a history straight from them, no problem. Then there's the Kano Chronicle, which was written in the Hausa city of Kano, which then has a 1,000-year history in the chronicle. There's a lot that we can just take straight from the Kano Chronicle. In other parts of Africa, there's the Kilwa Chronicle, which is Tanzanian historians documenting their history. There's a lot that's weak, there's a lot that's flimsy in it, but there's stuff you can run with. Places like Ethiopia have a very well documented history from about 800 BC till now. King by king, queen by queen, that type of history. Very, very detailed. Places like Sudan have very detailed histories. Again, we can give very, very detailed accounts. But there are places where the documents are thin, or the documents really have been destroyed. So, for example, there is a book called The Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man. And this is written by an English scholar, Dr. Albert Churchward. And there is a passage where he talks about manuscripts being found at one of the Zimbabwe's, you know, the stone ruins in southern Africa? Yeah, manuscripts were found. And I'm quoting now, a boar hunter found them and, according to Albert Churchward, had some of those manuscripts burned, but still others still survive. Now, that was 1910. I've been on the hunt. Where are these manuscripts? Where are these manuscripts? What language are they in? So there are situations like that where there really are gaps in our knowledge. But the gaps are being filled. They're being filled by archaeology, where archaeologists are digging up evidence, evidence that we didn't know existed. So to give an example, a boat has been found in the Nigeria region in Yobe State, and that boat archaeologists have dated to between 6,000 BC and 6,500 BC. Wow. The oldest boat in Africa and the third oldest known boat in the world. Wow. Again, no one knew that that was there until a Nigerian gentleman called Malam Yao found it in his, he was digging a water cistern, couldn't dig any deeper, wanted to know why, and then eventually the authorities got involved and then conducted an excavation. They found the oldest boat in Africa.
Wow. Wow. How did Europeans strategically erase African contributions from history? And why was that erasing so central to their global dominance?
A number of scholars have broke down precisely how it was done. The most important one being the African-American social scientist, Professor Chancellor James Williams. His book is called The Destruction of Black Civilization. Okay, let me summarize. Essentially, there were a number of ways that the erasure of Black history was done. One was to simply destroy the evidence. And so you would get cities that were destroyed, and during the colonial period, they were not allowed to be rebuilt. And let me give you an example of that. Britain conquered the Empire of Benin. The Empire of Benin is in modern Nigeria. And the Benin Palace, according to Captain Richard Burton, could comfortably accommodate 15,000 people. That's the scale.
Wow.
When the British destroyed it in 1897, the rulers of Benin, they're known as the Obas of Benin, were not allowed to rebuild. So consequently, what's there now is a fraction of the 15,000 accommodation size. Do you see? Why weren't they allowed to rebuild? Because it would then become a symbol of pride for the people and would then help them psychologically to uplift them in the fight against colonialism. Because when the colonials are saying you people are backward and inferior, they could say, but look at this. Right. But if they're not allowed to look at this because it's been destroyed and you're not allowed to rebuild. Again, also with Benin, there was a series of walls and trenches that the people of Benin built. And according to the Guinness Book of World Records, it's the largest construction work in human history prior to the modern mechanical period. They estimated between 5,000 and 8,000 miles worth of walling. We now know that figure is wrong. It's actually 10,000 miles worth of walling. So you may wonder, well, what happened to it? Destroyed in 1897 by the British. Same thing, they were not allowed to rebuild. Why? Because it would then become a symbol of pride. So what's there now is ruins that would actually need to be restored so that people can see the grandeur of what was there. So that's one thing you can destroy. The second thing is you can seize the evidence. Using the example of Benin, there were upwards of 2,000 pieces of fine art that were seized and are in London institutions, Parisian institutions, Stuttgart and Berlin institutions. They're not in Nigeria. Now, what are they doing in London? Because these pieces, each one represents millions of pounds worth of net worth. And if you've got 2,000 pieces and each one is millions of pounds worth of net worth, essentially it's billions of pounds of net worth that has been denied to Nigeria and is enriching London, Paris, Stuttgart. And also, unless the people in London display that and display it properly, you don't know that stuff ever existed. So they can say, but, you guys have nothing. And they're right, because it's in London or it's in Stuttgart. Do you see? And essentially, that's another way that you just asset strip. The next thing is to say that, yes, Africa has history, but black people have no part in that history. So yeah, you black people, you were in ancient Egypt, but you were the slaves in ancient Egypt. You weren't the ancient Egyptians. And then come with physical, anthropological lies to make the ancient Egyptians a different race to black people. Make the ancient Carthaginians a different race to black people. And until very recently, there were books as recently as 1980 that claim that the people of Ethiopia are a different race to black people. And same thing, there are any black people in Ethiopia? You guys were the slaves. And this is the kind of rubbish. And so it became very difficult for a black person to read a mainstream book and get any pride out of it, because either the stuff would be denied or it would be presented in such a way that that wasn't you. Yeah, you were there, but you were only the slaves that were there. And this is the kind of nonsense that the Eurocentrists were able to get away with.
The history of the Moors in Spain and Portugal has been heavily distorted. Can you share the truth about their reign and how historians work to whitewash their African origins?
Yeah, the Moors is a complicated history. It's very, very complicated. And all of Moorish history doesn't belong to black people. So we need to pull out which bits do and which bits don't. So if we're looking at the rule in Spain and Portugal, what people mean is they mean the rule from 710 AD up to 1492 AD. And for most of that period, there were 4 dynasties that ruled. You had the Umayyad dynasty, you had the Almoravid dynasty, you had the Almohades dynasty, and you had the Nasrid dynasties. And the second and the third one were undoubtedly Africans. So the second dynasty, the Almoravids, they had their origins in the Senegal River region. And the Almohades were black Moroccans, and the records are clear, black. And so that period, the second and the third dynasties, was where the Moors ruled in Spain from a city called Seville. And so Seville is an African-built city. And it still has grand monuments, the Alcazaba Palace, the Golden Tower, the bridges. Very, very impressive. I've been, and I can heavily recommend that people take a look. Now, Dynasty 1, the Umayyads, they're a mixture of people, but we're a part of the mix. And the Nasrids begin as an Arab dynasty, but it ends up as a black dynasty. Presumably during that period, Africans got the right person to marry the right woman, and then children came out of it, who then got to marry the right woman, and children came out of it. So by the time we get to the end of that dynasty, they're actually black.
Right.
Yeah. So consequently, there is a lot of black history. But as I said, Dynasty 1 and Dynasty 4, we share the glory with the Arabs. Yeah. All right. Dynasty 1, they rule from a city called Cordova. And there is a palace on the outskirts of Cordova called the Medinet El Zahra. That palace is off the scale. Yeah, people should take a look. Yeah. Then you have in the 4th dynasty, the Beni Nazir, the Nasrids, they're ruling from Granada. And the Granada palace, the Alhambra, is off the scale. So people should, visit these places and take a look at what's there. Now, as I said, the history is complicated because the Africans that were even during the 2nd and 3rd dynasties, not every African was dark-skinned. There were some light-skinned Berber types in the mix as well, but obviously the dark-skins were the majority, because the word Moor itself is a derivative of a Roman word for dark or black. So it is the term that would have been used in medieval times for black people.
Mm-hmm. And what's the link, the connection, or the difference between Berbers and Moors?
Mm-hmm. Basically, Berber is the term that appears in Arabic literature. Moor is the term that appears in European literature. But they approximately refer to the same groups of people, the people in North Africa. Now, the people in North Africa, before the Arabs got there, were predominantly black. But not every single person was black. Do you see? Mm-hmm. And it's the not every single person is where Eurocentric scholars can now get off and exploit that to make it look like none of them were.
Yeah.
which of course is nonsense.
Yeah. And another thing you said, I think it was the fourth dynasty that what started Arab, and by the end of it, they turned black. You intimated that potentially it may have been to do with marriages and that type of politics.
Well, without a doubt, that it would have been marriages, and it would be a rare example in our history where people stepped correctly on that.
Right. Okay. So it's been documented. It's married. It definitely marriages. It's nothing to do with there was some fighting back by the black people in some wars. And
that's possible too.
Right.
But marriage seems to be the better explanation.
Okay.
And why we know this, or why we think we know this, is because the Spaniards act out the fall of Granada once a year. They have a festival, and they will have these huge puppets, one representing the King of Spain, King Ferdinand, the Queen of Spain, Queen Isabella, the King of the Moors, Boabdil. Boabdil is the European name for him, and his mother. And the king of the Moorish king, Abu Abdallah or Boabdil, is always shown as black, and his mother is shown as black, and she's veiled so you can see her black hands. And there's no way you can confuse them two with the king and queen of Spain, Isabella and Ferdinand.
It's interesting because it seems that whenever we as a people, black people, get our freedom, it's on as much as possible on a peaceful level, as much as possible. You spoke about the people from the Americas, the Brazils that started their own states. We have this going through marriage. There's many other examples where they've fought as little as possible, or even maybe none. Now, is that the case everywhere, or is there examples where there's actually been a fight back and a war, a physical, where there's been warriors that have said no and fought?
Yeah, I mean, even the conquest of Spain was warriors. Do you see? And what that's to do with is North Africa was conquered by Germanic speakers known as the Vandals. And they conquered North Africa in the 5th century AD. And they did a lot of damage. Vandals, they did a lot of damage. So when the opportunity came in 710 for Africans to invade Spain and kick the Germanics' butts, you've got to remember, in 710, the people in Spain, the ruling class, were speaking German-based languages, the same as the Vandals. Okay. When the opportunity came to kick their butts, Africans took it. Well, you want us to sail over there and kick them? Yeah, we'll do it. So that's a classic example. Yep. It's not the only example. In researching the transition from ancient Kush to medieval Nubia, this is Sudanese history, the Romans wanted to make the descendants of ancient Kush a part of the Roman Empire. And they negotiated with them. And the people signed on the dotted line, yep, we're a part of the Roman Empire, and then attacked the Romans straight afterwards.
Right, yeah, okay.
Yeah. And that level of, taking the mickey, we did that. You read about a chapter in Ethiopia's ancient history, how they ended up becoming Christian. There was a ship that had Europeans on it, Greco-Romans on the ship. They stormed the ship and killed everybody, but they spared 2 Syrian boys, and the Syrian boys just happened to be Christians. Yeah, they didn't know they happened to be Christians. They spared the boys because they're boys. They're not adults. And then you read the history of why did they storm that ship and kill everybody? Because a previous European ship took the mickey. And if you take the mickey, the next ship that comes along, you're going to get spanked. Right. And again, we did that back in the day.
Interesting. Before the transatlantic slave trade, how did African societies approach marriage practices like polygamy and monogamy? And what do these traditions reveal about African culture and community life?
Okay. what you would get among wealthy men was polygyny, one man having multiple wives. But ordinary people can't afford that, so it's actually one-to-one. Polyandry certainly existed, but no one is sure one woman having multiple husbands. No one is sure how widespread it was. Now, of course, with Islam, with maybe half of African countries practicing that, that codifies polygyny and puts a limit of it on 4 women. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That's definitely a thing. But for ordinary Joe Schmo, it's one-to-one.
When we talk about slavery, there's a lot of focus placed on the transatlantic slave trade. Mm-hmm. How does understanding the trans-Saharan slave trade shift that narrative?
What it means is the trans-Saharan trade mostly blows up during the period when the Arabs conquer North Africa. So that would be your 600s, your 700s, and that will be going on and off right up until now, even. So it's a much longer history than the Atlantic-based slave trade. But it hasn't been that well studied. Precisely who, where, what, when. People make vague statements, but as far as a detailed history of what it was, how it worked, who was responsible, and so on, there aren't a huge amount of books that go there. I'm not saying they shouldn't go there. They should go there. But there's too much when it comes to the trans-Saharan slave trade that we really don't know. Mm. Now, just to show why I'm making that point, with the Atlantic slave trade, the little that we know is changing dramatically anyway. There's been a historian that I've been shouting out for the last 2 or 3 years, Professor Vincent Taraku Farrar, and he's written a book called Pre-Colonial African Material Culture, where he makes the point that one of the reasons for the transatlantic enslavement was to capture skills. And so where Africans were skilled in cotton, capture them and get them to do cotton in the Americas. Where they were skilled as farmers, capture them and bring them to the Americas to be farmers. Where they were skilled as horsemen, capture them and get them to be cowboys in the Americas. Where they were skilled as builders, ditto. Where they were skilled as boatmen, ditto. Now that's changed the game, because now mass enslavement is a technological transfer of African technology to the Western world. So the question we can now start to ask as we dig deep into trans-Saharan slavery, was it also a technological transfer?
Right.
Mm. And if it was, again, it would change the perspective on how we see the victims of that enslavement, because we now see, looking at the transatlantic example, wasn't stupid people that were being captured.
So the trans-Saharan slave trade was predominantly Arabs enslaving Africans and bringing them over to the East, the Far East.
There was that, or bring them into North Africa as well.
Right.
Yeah. So there are Black North Africans who are descended from enslaved people who were not originally North African.
Yeah.
And as you say, bringing people into the Middle East and so on.
What's been your research and studies in terms of, were there any, some people say that the ancient Egyptians were enslaving the Sudanese.
Quite possible. Yeah, quite possible.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, quite possible. But the ancient Egyptians enslaved a lot more people from the Middle East than they did from Sudan. Mm-hmm. The reason why they emphasize ancient Egypt enslaving Sudan is that way they can say, see, you black people were in ancient Egypt.
Right.
You were captured in Sudan and brought there as a way of de-Africanizing the ancient Egyptians. Yeah. And then when it comes to, but didn't the ancient Egyptians capture even more people in the Middle East and enslave them? Don't talk about that. So there's that going on as well. And capturing people in Southern Europe and enslaving them.
So what do the records show? Because some people say it's enslaving, some people say that these people they took from them or they volunteered themselves from the Middle East.
There is that. But it's mostly what do you do with captured prisoners of war?
Right.
Do you see? So A conquers B or A battles B. Whoever loses ends up being prisoners of war. There isn't really a prison industrial complex yet. So those people end up enslaved.
Yeah.
Then you've got people within Egypt who get into debt. And as you know, prison law and, slavery and debt, they're all connected. Most people in Scotland that are behind bars because of debt.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in ancient Egypt, you could work off debts. Yeah. And then that would be the reason why you'd be enslaved, do you see?
The discovery of Lucia has sparked debate around Native American ancestry.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
Why does her discovery disrupt so many widely accepted narratives about history?
This is what the issue is with Lucia. Lucia is remains that were found in Brazil. And everyone would have expected that she would have looked just like a Native American. And the Native Americans are part of the same group of people, the same family, that you would include the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Filipinos, that type of East Asian looking population. The Native Americans are thought to be their brothers and sisters. And so everyone expected that when they reconstructed the face of Lucia, she would be that too. And then they reconstructed the face and it was like, damn. And because she's the first South American that we know anything about, then double damn. And so all kinds of consternation has happened in anthropological circles because they've got something that they can't really explain. Also, I have read that something funky happened to the institution that housed Lucia and a fire took place. I don't know if you're aware of this.
No.
Yeah. So the original doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
Yeah. So make of that what you will. But yes, the peopling of ancient South America is now looking a bit different to what we were expecting. So I used to teach for years and years and years. The people of the Americas migrated from Siberia. You know, Siberia and Alaska are nearly touching.
Okay.
And the Siberians would be your Chinesey, Japanesey, Korean-looking population, and them and the Native Americans are the same. And Lucia upset all of that. And Lucia is not the only early skeleton that upsets the apple cart. And so it means that there's a black, prehistoric presence that needs to be acknowledged.
You said Afro-Cuban music is one of the clearest reflections of African music in the West. Can you explain why it stands out as such a strong cultural mosaic?
Here's why. If we look at African American music, it has undergone something called Code Noir, the Black Codes, which suppressed the drums in America for a long period of time. And so the polyrhythmic complexity of African music disappeared in African American music.
Right.
But it didn't disappear in Afro-Cuban music. They maintain that polyrhythmic complexity. So what's polyrhythm? Having multiple rhythms sounding at the same time. And so one drummer plays one pattern, a second drummer plays a different pattern, a third drummer plays a different pattern again. And when the three drums are sounded, you get this interlocking groove. And that groove is what makes people dance. And Afro-Cuban music has preserved that complexity, where African-American music, they lost that complexity and their musicians had to go and find it.
Right.
And so you had specific jazz drummers, such as Art Blakey, spending time in Africa, learning African drum patterns and bringing that into jazz.
Right.
You had James Brown with his tune Licking Stick, 1966, which is the beginnings of funk, which is polyrhythmic soul music. James Brown and his people came up with that. Yeah. But before James Brown and before Art Blakey, polyrhythm had largely disappeared. So what happened in Cuban music is they preserved it. Now, just as you have a relationship between soul music in America and its parent, gospel music. So a person that's a soul singer, chances are you get their biography and you find out that they sang in church. Aretha Franklin, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Right? In Cuba, the Black Cubans that produced Afro-Cuban, you then check their backgrounds, and they used to sing in Santeria environments. So the great queen of Cuban music, Celia Cruz, grew up singing Santeria. Santeria is the religious Yoruba music. And she did that before crossing over into mainstream Afro-Cuban. These are the same stuff that gets called salsa. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not the correct name. Afro-Cuban is the same name. And so Afro-Cuban has preserved that complexity, and it has influenced jazz. So there is a branch of jazz called Afro-Cuban. It has influenced some of the African-American soul groups. Some of them, you can hear the Afro-Cuban. So it's, and it's had a big impact in Africa. I remember seeing an interview with Salif Keita. Have I got his name correct?
Yeah.
And he used to listen to Cuban music.
Right.
Yeah, he grew up on it. It's such a big influence. So it's not just so Africa influencing the world. You also got Black people in different parts of the diaspora influencing Africa as well. This type of story.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I didn't know that actually Santeria was a type of music as well. I thought it was just their religion from the Vodou or Obia, whatever you want to call it. But is this music side connected to the religious side, or is it? Yeah. It's all together. Yeah.
Yes, it's all together. So basically, a Santeria singer is singing Yoruba religious material, and so Celia Cruz grew up learning that stuff.
Yeah, and that's how they've kept a lot of their traditional beliefs intact through that and under the guise of the Christianity.
Yeah.
As is interesting, that's how they've kept the rhythm of the music as well.
Yeah.
All these different aspects that make up a full human being and assist our spirituality.
That's right.
Yeah. You got a very interesting lecture that I watched on where you're breaking this all down in terms of the music. And I've always thought, so I'd recommend that to anyone that's interested in music. And I've always kind of looked at the similarity between Calypso and the Afrobeat of the 1960s, 1970s. It sounds like it's the same music.
Yeah.
And you take people away from the environment, people are still the same people.
Yeah, and what's more, the musicologists are in total agreement. One great musicologist was the great jazz man Dizzy Gillespie. Dizzy wrote a book called To Be or Not to Bop, which is about it. And he said he visited Nigeria, and he said, wait a minute, this music sounds just like calypso. And then because I know what he's talking about, he means high life.
Yeah.
And high life does indeed sound just like calypso. And there is a musicologist called Ashanafe Kebede, who's written a book called Roots of Black Music, says that calypso and high life grew up together.
You've also said that business is the final frontier. Why do you believe that building businesses that can hire our children is so critical for true independence?
Exactly for the reason that you've said. I believe that it is up to the community to create a disproportionate number of jobs and job opportunities for the next generation. Because if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it. And our children and our descendants will have the right to cuss us out. And I don't want to be cussed out. I don't want them to cuss me. Because ultimately, that's where jobs come from. And, we do have to create those opportunities. So we at The Black Secret believe that we need to teach the adults wealth education as well. So we want them to be inspired by the past. We want people to know that Mansa Musa I was possibly the richest man in human history with an estimated net worth of £249 billion, calculated at 2012 prices. People need to know that. All right, so when are we going to create somebody who's going to knock him off his perch? Yeah, knock Elon off his perch. Yeah, knock Jeff Bezos off his. And we need to be about that. We need to be about the wealth, because it's from the wealth that you get to do other things. And so the reason why wealth matters is if you want to create scholarships for people, if you want to do charity work, if you want to set up supplementary schools and go from there into full-time schools, all of these things take wealth. If you want to house the unemployed, that takes wealth. If you want to give people opportunities, that takes wealth. And our people who are about it need to become entrepreneurial so that they can lend a hand.
And what do you think is, it's a good saying I like is, if you're hungry, you can't be spiritual.
True.
People need to have their bellies full before they can start really thinking of the meaning of life and what am I here for, etc. So yeah, that is a basic need that we have to fulfill. What's your approach in terms of business models? Is there anything you've learned from the past, from history, that you apply, or are you looking at kind of current business models that we can utilize to progress?
Yeah, even things like Partner. I've since found out that goes back to 18th century Yoruba land during the reign of one of the rulers. His name was Abiodun in the 18th century. And it was called Esusu. And then in Trinidad, apparently some people still call it Susu to this day.
Yeah, I've heard the word, yeah.
And that's become Partner and Box Hand elsewhere. And as you know, that was the tool that Black people in Britain in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s used to buy property. So some of the old knowledge is still relevant. But what we've done is this. We've taken as much of the old knowledge as we can take, and we've synthesized it around what we consider to be the 5 main books on wealth. The 5 main books: George Sabira, African-American scholar, Black Folks' Guide to Making Big Money in America. European-American guru, Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, which, by the way, is built on ancient Egyptian principles,
All right.
the 7 laws of Tehuti. Yeah. And we highlight that. Then you've got the Japanese-American guru, Robert T. Kiyosaki, an English guru called Andrew Craig, How to Own the World, and Italian-American guru MJ DeMarco, The Millionaire Fast Lane. And what we've done is synthesize all of this into a step-by-step plan so that anyone who studies wealth with us will know exactly where they are and what their next move is. And once they've made that next move, we can show them what the next move is. Once they've made that, so we lay out into a very practical program. And if you follow our program, your game really does change.
Okay, give thanks, give thanks. There's a couple of those books that I've never heard of, so I'm going to look into them. And I think it may be worth me investing in this course myself. Can you just let the people know how they can find out more about it if they want to sign up?
Yeah, our company is The Black Secret, www.theblacksecret.co.uk. We run a subscription course. The subscription, the full price is £35 per calendar month, but we do run discounts from time to time. So if you jump on it, what we're doing for £18, what are we doing?
Yeah, it's currently £18.
Right. So there's discounts that we're offering people. And if you lock the price in, it stays at 18.
Right.
And then we will be adding more content as well. So right now we have 55 hours of history, 25 hours of wealth education. And that will continue to grow as we add more and more.
Brilliant.
So the classes, you can watch them at any time. So if you want to watch them at 3 o'clock in the morning, because that's the only time you have free, 3 o'clock in the morning, do it. You can download my lecture notes. You can download my PowerPoints. Yeah. And then watch the class, join the class. Anything that you didn't understand, freeze it, pull the cursor back and play it again. And you go over, and then at the end of each class, at the end of each module, there's a test. And we have an algorithm in place to mark your test and then give you complete feedback. And you do that as many times as you need to get the 100%.
Okay. All right. Yeah, give thanks.